Going to the article, you did an article about requests for, I keep remembering the requests for proposals.
Proposal. Yeah.
So, what size firms usually do this? When do you see like the company getting so big where they begin to ask for this kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, firms of all sizes end up doing this. It really just depends on kind of what client you're shooting for. Generally, so to your second question, it's generally companies that have a fairly established procedure internally for choosing their vendors, whether it's in immigration or other areas. They have vendors all over the place, right? They get to a certain point, like a certain level of maturity within their company, where they have somebody come in and start establishing the procedures, right? And once those procedures are set, it becomes a company policy, and then they got to start doing RFPs. So I've seen, immigration programs of like 40 or 50 foreign nationals. Like, why do they need to do an RFP? But the company itself is much more mature and larger, so they just do RFPs for all their vendors, right? And so, in that case, if you want that particular client, you will have to do an RFP, right? And so. That's why I think it's really, especially if you want to grow your firm as a business immigration firm, it's at least good to know how RFPs work. And if you want it, you don't necessarily have to want it. You don't have to go for companies that do RFPs, but it's good to know how it works in case you end up having one fall in your lap or something, right? So
I guess it's really important to have to get involved in the RFP game, because that's just a ton of business and a ton of work. Now, I was talking with Mitch Wexler. He's a partner at Fragment, headquartered in Irvine, Southern California, in charge of there. He's talking about the frustration. Sometimes it depends on the company, but some of them really just go down to the bottom of how much it costs. And we get this on solo, marriage cases and stuff, where people just base it on the cost, or it's like, well, that doesn't really capture the full extent of what you're buying. If you're just looking for how much a car costs, for example, if you get a really crappy car, you still got a car. It doesn't mean you got something that you could use consistently or for commercial purposes, use for 20 years and not have issues with it. So I mean, how often does it come where someone's RFP or request has certain features, and you have to kind of educate it and be like, no, you need more than this. This doesn't really capture it. How do you communicate that?
Yeah, a lot. It happens all the time. And I kind of was a little bit idealistic in the beginning, thinking like, oh yeah, we could educate them, because it's not just about your, comparing a fee schedule to a fee schedule, right? That doesn't capture the extent of how immigration works. Like, you could have really low fees on a H-1B or whatever it is, but maybe you're not doing, a lot of work, and then you get the RFPs, and then you get, denials, and you have to get appeals, and you should look at your year-end annual cost. Like, that's a better kind of indicator of how much are you truly spending. But that's not how it works, unfortunately. If it's a company, number one, and not all companies, in fact, most companies aren't like this. But if it's a company that just cares about cost or the bottom line, that's a very difficult, company to please. It's basically, they have. So I've seen online price auctions as part of the RFP process, where they have a system, and then they have all the participants log on anonymously, and then they say, okay, perm is up, and then you have to basically bid against each other. And lower the price, right? And so and you can get a sense of if that's a priority for the company by, what they say in the RFP, because they will list what their goals are as part of the first section of the RFP. And then you can kind of see by reading the rest of the RFP, is cost really the number one criteria for them? Because if it is, that's generally a company that we would decline to participate in, because it's not a good fit for the way I like to practice immigration law, and it's just a recipe for disaster down the line. Maybe there are some firms that it is a good fit for, and those firms should be in that RFP, right? But you can also look for, I think the general rule, what I've seen, the most normal case, are companies that cost is a factor. They don't want to be ripped off, understandable, right? But they also want employee experience. They also want good quality of work. They want good technology. They want a lot of things, and cost sometimes is just one of them. So it really depends on the company. And the way you know this is you should have a sense of it beforehand, in kind of like the pre-RFP work that you do, getting to know the cultures of companies and the teams that are leading their immigration programs.
And it's such a hard thing. These RFPs are in all industries. And one, for example, is the Pentagon and getting defense contractors. And I remember there was this one defense contractor or Pentagon official who was in trouble because he would have dinners with one party and then he gave it to them. And his defense, he's like, listen, they have the identical product, identical prices. I don't know who to tell. It's a flip of a coin sometimes. And it's, how much could they dive in deep to see how good the personnel are, how much it's really hard to judge this kind of stuff. Is this lawyer going to pay more attention or not? And there's really, inevitably, it's going to be just like, again, individuals who come to a consultation, they're going to go by a warm feeling that they have, whether they like it or not. And sometimes some people put on a good consultation, and then after that, it goes downhill. So it's like, even if you do an RFP and you prepare, it's always a crapshoot of what's going to happen down the line. And you just kind of have to adjust and then redo it again later on if they're not happy with the service.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and I think what I recommend in the, sorry, I got dogs barking over there and I got a train going beyond me. But what I recommend in the article is like, the RFP should not be the first time you're looking at a company, right? It should be the culmination of the work that you've done on a company. You need to go out, not you, but anybody who's interested in kind of winning business on the business immigration side, kind of the higher volume area, should be getting to know companies, getting to know the people. You should allow them the opportunity to get to know you, right? Go network with them, go speak at conferences, get to know cultures, understand what they like to do, how they like to work, who they like to work with. I'd say most decisions for RFPs are, honestly, the feeling I get, they're mostly made before the RFP is even issued. They have a favorite of who they like, right? And that's just human nature. That's just the way it works. But they have to bring in other, competitors, right? They have to bring in other parties as a point of comparison, often for procurement, which we can get into, to do the comparison. That they have to kind of go through the process, right? But at the end of the day, if the favorite does a good job, they're likely going to win because they were the favorite from the beginning, and that's who they wanted. Because if you're an HR and you have all this responsibility to keep your company compliant, you got all this pressure on you, and you only hear about it when something goes wrong. You never hear about it when something goes right. You want somebody you can trust working with. It's super important.
Yeah, and you mentioned we could talk about procurement. What is involved in that? I didn't even think about that.
So, once a company gets to a certain maturity level, even past maybe the RFP process, they have procurement departments that are basically responsible for making sure that the company is getting the best possible deal in all the contracts that they sign. So there are individuals who just do this nonstop, right? And I've seen, so they will run the RFP, they will issue the RFP with the HR on copy. You can't talk to anybody, once the RFP is issued, you can't talk to anybody else but the procurement person, just to keep it fair and on the level, right? Their job is to understand every industry they work with, understand, what factors are important for the company, whether they're getting the best value, out of those factors and from the law firm or from the provider, whoever it is, right? And depending on the company, they may have a huge say in who the company chooses, or they just may be an advisor, and really it's just going to be the HR that has the main say. It really just depends, right? And I've seen it go both ways. It's there's a spectrum of kind of control and power that procurement has over the process. And that's, once again, that's something that would be good to know before you decide to accept. Am I going to be a good fit, working with this procurement and their priorities, right? Is that a good thing for my firm? Because the RFP is a lot of work, man. I mean, if you're going to engage your firm in the RFP process, you should have a reasonable expectation that you're getting something out of it, whether it's a really good shot at winning the business or you want the practice, so it's of value to your firm to go through it. But it takes considerable resources out of you, your staff, your marketing team. Maybe you have to go and purchase technology licenses to kind of give them, give the company what they're looking for. There's all sorts of, potentially sunk costs as part of the process. You have to think long and hard, if you're going to participate in these.
I mean, these are potentially $1 million contracts or multi-million-dollar contracts too. So
yeah, I mean, they can be anywhere from a few $100,000 and up, right?
Yeah.
So
It's very interesting. Now, there's two things that popped up. One is, I'll talk about this a little later, but the accounting firms who are coming into immigration and partnering up as a bar losing stuff. So that's going to be a major competitor that's coming in that has like the infrastructure and the foundations to be able to jump into these kind of things. But before that, it just popped in my head. It's an interesting potential position where an immigration lawyer that has a lot of business immigration experience could become a consultant to help these firms better understand what to look for RFP, because the HR won't necessarily know themselves, but an immigration lawyer would know, especially if they came from one of these firms, to be like, okay, they're saying this, but what about this? It seems like a very interesting consulting position to have if you could, express that and get hired for it.
I mean, that's something I personally would love to do. In theory, it's probably difficult to pull off because if you think about it, like we're all kind of in the same field. So, would that law firm is in the RFP, be wary of competition, right? From this person is kind of, in my case, I think I'm probably a unique case in the sense that I've come from that background. I'm not necessarily in the RFP game right now, right? So I'm not really a threat. And I would be able
you're a neutral observer that could come and really dig in like this and behind the scenes. Like for these big companies, it kind of makes sense to have someone who knows what they're doing, can actually look behind the scenes of an RFP. Whereas HR, then they have 10 different types of law firms that they hire. They can't know the nuances of what's needed for a motion to reopen stuff to how to calculate there. But I think it's like really cool. I think it'd be a full-time job, but you just got to explain to these companies that that's actually something that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, consulting to law firms is one thing, consulting to companies is another. Yeah. I would say, companies have very tight, mobility or immigration budgets, and their HR is expected to handle this without any additional consultation help for the most part. I've seen some companies bring in consultants, at the very, very high end, the very large, companies may be able to do this, but it's fairly rare.